Good morning, Algebra. So let's take a look today at using the factoring that we've been learning to solve equations. One of the kinds of equations that we can solve is an equation with an x squared in it, or an a squared or a b squared, or any variable squared. That is called a quadratic equation if it has that variable squared as its highest exponent. So we're going to take a look at solving quadratic equations by factoring. We did this a little bit before we left. We a couple of times solved something with some factors, right? X plus 3 times x minus 2 equals 0. And we looked at the x plus 3 equals 0 and the x minus 2 equals 0. We found that it could have two solutions. So let's take a look at some of the problems two problems that will be very much like the problems that you will see on today's assignment. Okay? So I'm going to just pop over here. So I've got this problem, 7x squared equals 21x. Now I know you're likely to want to divide away the 7's and divide away the x's. But what we're going to do is we're going to follow a very specific set of steps every single time when we're solving quadratic equations. It works for all of the methods for solving quadratic equations. So let's make sure that we try it, that we start out this way. The first step is going to be to move everything to the left. So I'm going to start with 7x squared minus 21x equals 0. All right, so I've moved everything to the left. And now solving by factoring implies that I'm going to factor this. So I look at this and I don't see a trinomial. And I see two terms, but I don't see a difference of two squares. 7 is not a perfect square. 21 is not, x is not. But really what I should be beginning with is greatest common factor. So let's always see if we can look for a greatest common factor first. So I see a 7 and I see an x. I start my parentheses, and so 7x times x is 7x squared minus 3 equals 0. So 7x times negative 3 is negative 21x. Now let's take a look at this. I've got two factors here. I've got this 7x, and I've got this x minus 3. So if I take 7x, and I say it equals 0, then of course divide by 7, x equals 0. And if I take this, and if x were 0, then of course this equation would work because 0 times anything equals 0. And so then my question is, well, what else could make this equation work? Remember we did this in class? So x minus 3 equals 0. X minus 3, so x could equal 3. So if x equals 3, that makes this whole thing equal 0 times whatever this is over here, which it would be 21, right? So 0 times 21 equals 0. So these are my two solutions. Okay? Let's take a look at this one over here. In this case, my x squared is on the right. And if I pull it out, if I move it to the left, it's going to, it's going to be negative. And personally, I don't like that very much. But so I tend to think of this as moving the 15x to the right and then flipping the 0 over to the other side. So I would start like this. I would say 60x squared, since it's positive, and I sure do like leading positives, minus 15x from both sides. And then I'm going to flop that 0 over to the other side, and I've got this. Let's do GCF, okay? So I'm going to pull out 15x. And so I've got 4x here. 15x times 4x is 60x squared minus 1 equals 0. And so if I take a look at these two factors, then 15x could equal 0. And so therefore x equals 0. That is one possible solution. And 4x minus 1 could equal 0. So I'm going to do plus 1, right? 4x equals 1, x equals 1/4. Now, if you can see that x here could equal 3, I'm going to just scooch back on the other side here. If you can see that x could equal 0 and x could equal 3, and you understand how that works, then what I often do is I just write x equals 0 or 3, and I put a box around it like that. Okay, so then I can just go ahead, if I see it, and know that it's correct and I'm doing the math correctly, and just write those solutions. I could do the same over here. As soon as it gets a little bit more complex in your factors, then you want to make sure that you are thinking about that correctly, right? That you can see that this would be x equals 1/4. But this is how this works. We solve by factoring. Step 1, move everything to the left equals 0. Again, move everything to the left equals 0. Do you hear that? You have to do that part first. Then you can factor the whole thing, factor completely. And that's what we're going to do over the next several days, is continue to factor and factor and factor completely, this time with solving equations. Then you look at each factor that has a variable, set it equal to 0, see what x can equal. The number of factors, let me try again. The number of solutions equals the highest variable, all right? And we will talk about what that means. Sometimes there are double solutions that count twice, but that is not for today. So move everything to the left equals 0, factor the whole thing, find out what each factor could equal, and you've got your solutions. All right, happy mathing!